Yeah, I mean, there are properties of the world that go beyond atoms in space and time with mass and charge. We need to add a further property to our inventory of the world's properties, consciousness. That doesn't mean it needs to be located in some wholly different realm up in heaven or in the land of ectoplasm and so on. It may be attached to the same stuff right down here. It could be that even fundamental particles have consciousness as among the fundamental properties, along with mass and charge. That's not to say they have souls.
Strict, I would have to say. I think there is only one phenomenal consciousness underlying the whole of nature. And when I say phenomenal, what I mean is it is conscious by virtue of having experiences. And it doesn't need to have higher level mental functions, such as self-awareness, ability to introspect, self-reflection, metacognition. It doesn't need to have any of that. If it is experiencing something, anything, then it is phenomenally conscious. And it is in that sense that I say that at the foundational level of nature, there is only one universal phenomenal consciousness. But many neuroscientists, psychologists, psychiatrists, they use the word consciousness when they actually mean consciousness. And the difference is the following. If you are experiencing your breathing, then you are conscious. But you are only meta-conscious of your breathing if, in addition to the experience of breathing, you also know that you are experiencing your breathing. That's meta-consciousness. And of course, you also have meta-consciousness. If you know that you are experiencing your breathing, then you're meta-conscious. So there are many degrees of consciousness according to how many times consciousness folds in upon itself in order to objectify its own experiences. Now, humans are eminently meta-conscious. We say that we have hunger or we have pain. And we make this separation between us and the pain. So like, I have pain. So the pain is not me. I am the entity having the pain. We make that separation because we are meta-conscious. We know that we are experiencing pain, but we aren't the pain. We are the entity who knows that he or she is experiencing pain. You see what I mean? So we are fundamentally self-reflective when we do that. And it's only by doing that that we can report on experience. I can only tell somebody else what I am experiencing if, in addition to the experience, I know that I am experiencing it. So for many
consciousness is correct. I link consciousness to complexity, to certain types of complexity. Brain, any network, any system that has a certain type of complexity that needs to be mathematically defined and has been mathematically defined will have experience, will have some measure, some modicum of consciousness. If it's a small network, like a bee's network, it will have little. If it's a human brain, it might have an enormous amount of conscious sensation. The evidence seems to suggest to me, as a physicist, that we do live in a universe that seems to be certainly conducive to life, conducive to, planets that live for a long time in a habitable zone. There's, evolution by natural selection that inexorably seems to breed complexity, complex organisms. We can see it in the evolutionary record. And then if complexity breeds is identical or gives rise to consciousness, then you have the statistically likelihood that somewhere conscious beings will have evolved. First, they just have an inkling they have some conscious sensation, probably body-centered conscious sensation of pain and pleasure and nausea. Later on, it becomes more sophisticated. At some point, consciousness begins to reflect upon itself because the brain becomes so hypertrophied. And so then you get self-consciousness that we spend a lot of time on, that we obsess about ourselves. Most other animals don't do that. And I think this evolution can go on. At some point, it can go on to our descendant, onto computers. And at some point, you can imagine there's some sort of global, planetary-wide consciousness is imagined, for instance, by Taylor de Chardin.
Okay, well, this is for functionally. So right now, there's no specific thing we can point to and say, you need consciousness for that. Mm-hmm. So my inclination is to believe that, in principle, AGI is possible. At the very least, I don't see why someone couldn't simulate a brain, ultimately have a
computational system that produces all of our behavior. And if that's possible, I'm sure vastly many other computational systems of equal or greater sophistication are possible with all of our cognitive functions and more. And my inclination is to think that once you've got all these cognitive functions, perception, attention, reasoning, introspection, language, emotion, and so on, it's very likely you'll have consciousness as well. At least it's very hard for me to see how you'd have a system that had all those things while bypassing somehow consciousness.
And of course, when you're designing something that is supposed to be intelligent, you always ask, could this be conscious too? Because, I am an intelligent being, but the data processing in my head is accompanied by experience. There is something it is like to be me processing data. So what reason would I have to think that an AI would also be conscious, that there would be something it is like to be the AI while it's processing data? So, and it's a vexing question. And the reason it's a vexing question is that it's based on a wrong assumption. But you don't know that. It's a hidden assumption that you're making without knowing. And it puts you against the wall, because whatever you do, however you design that piece of hardware, there is nothing about structure and function that could suggest that there is accompanying experience. So you can change the structure and the function whichever way you want. You have no reason to think that that structure and function would be accompanied by something it is like to be that thing. It's just processing data. It doesn't matter in how many different ways you process data. It's just data processing. It's still a calculator of some form. And at some point I realized what the wrong starting assumption was. And the starting assumption was that material arrangements are primary and somehow give rise to consciousness, to experience. And you just have to find that specific structure and function that does that. Well, that's completely hopeless, because there is nothing about material configurations, mass, charge, momentum, spin, geometrical relationships, frequency, amplitude, whatever. There is nothing about physical parameters in terms of which you could deduce the qualities of experience, what it is like to have a bellyache, to taste a strawberry, to fall in love. There's nothing about structure and function in terms of which you can deduce qualities. And once I realized that, I realized that, okay, I have to change my starting assumption. Matter doesn't create consciousness. As far as I can know, matter is a content of consciousness. The things I see, touch, the concreteness of this bottle, these are qualities, these are experiences, and I label these categories of experience matter. Matter is the experience that appears on the screen of my perception. But it is in consciousness. So of course I can't create consciousness out of matter, because matter itself is something that appears in consciousness. To say that the only reality is the reality we can perceive is probably the most dangerous bullshit ever produced by the human intellect. It's a denial of humanity, first and foremost, and immediately afterwards, it's a denial of reality, because that it's simply not the case that everything that exists and is important appears on the screen of perception. When I fall in love, I don't see the love on my screen of perception. So there you go. What is probably the most driving part of human experience, and which certainly exists, not only exists, it drives history, it's not on the screen of perception. Now, isn't it extraordinarily stupid to deny that? It's almost a psychic illness to deny that. How much fear do you have to have about what you really, really are in order to deny yourself to that extent? It is only since the Enlightenment project in the West, back in the 17th century, that we started talking about, what is the literal truth? What is literally going on? And we came to think of fields and invisible subatomic particles as literally true. Well, they are not. They are handy, useful, theoretical entities. Nature behaves as though there were fundamental subatomic particles in fields. That doesn't mean that fundamental subatomic particles and fields literally exist. What is a quantum field? It's a mathematical tool that allows us to predict the behavior of nature very, very, very precisely, and therein lies its usefulness. We shouldn't throw it away. Fields help us predict nature, predict the behavior of nature, and develop technology. That doesn't mean that fields literally exist. So I'm trying to highlight this, that literal explanations are a recent epistemic invention of the Western mind, because the conclusion I'm driving to is that everything is ultimately a metaphor. We are monkeys evolved on a peripheral planet of an ordinary galaxy. We did not evolve the cognitive apparatus to go beyond metaphors, similes. We just do not know what the absolute root of what's going on is. It's preposterous to think we could with 1.5 pounds of gray matter in our heads.